Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Good morning.
Good.
Doing good, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I am going to be balancing Zoom and people here in person. My name is Chip Sprague with Home Inspection Carolina, and I'm going to be chatting with you about some very exciting stuff, which is mold and how to kind of identify mold and what we're looking for as we kind of go through mold, and just give you a basic understanding what mold is and how it kind of affects us, and whether we should be recommending this to our clients or asking them questions to kind of qualify for what they need with their mold. Can everybody see my screen, understanding mold, before I get going, my PowerPoint? Just want to make sure they're
Yes.
see that. Perfect, thank you. Why does it say we're still too quiet for some reason? All right. So, and if I keep looking down here, you guys just yell at me and I'll look up there. So trying to balance the two of them here. So first, let's just jump into, and of course, as we start going across here, if anybody has any questions, do not hesitate to jump in and ask any questions that we might have. So what is mold? Does anybody know what mold is? It is a living organism. You're absolutely right. Well, it's a type of fungi that can be found both indoors and outdoors, right? And that's the problem that it has, is we want to keep it outdoors as much as possible, because it reproduces through spores, which can be released into the air. Now, one of the things that mold has, and can anybody tell me, I got a question for everybody. Here's a tough question. What is one thing that mold does that we do and every single living organism on this planet does that we all have in common? There's one thing that every single thing on this planet, living organism, has in common. Sort of, kind of. Sort of, you're on the right track.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Would you say?
We grow.
We grow. We do. We do. One thing we all have in common. What do we all do? We do breathe. Eat. We all eat.
Good.
You got everybody's tiptoeing around it.
Does it breathe?
Yeah,
Breathe,
we
yeah,
breathe.
we said air here, right? We breathe, we eat. Why do we breathe and why do we eat?
Live and grow.
To live and survive, right? Everything on this planet lives to survive, right? We all try to survive. So what happens with mold as we kill it or change anything, and what mold needs is the same exact thing that we need. What are the three things we need to survive?
Air, water, food.
There you go. You got it. We need air, water, and food, right? And that's the same exact thing that mold needs. So if we take one of those away, it can't survive just like us. So it can't, but what happens is it wants to survive. So if I were to take the water away, or I take the air away, all of a sudden it goes crazy and it starts sporing into the air because it's trying to survive. As it spores into the air, then it lands on other particles, any organic material, sheetrock with the paper, any wood products, anything that's organic, food, oranges left on the table, bananas, whatever, and it lands on that, and then it wants to survive, so it starts growing. So what happens is if you have a spore count, just going to throw some arbitrary numbers out there, we'll just say 100. So it regularly, under normal conditions, it's sporing 100 spores per cubic meter, right? That's its normal process. And all of a sudden we take away the air, it starts choking. Well, I got to survive. It just spores like crazy. So now it's at 1,000 that goes in the air, right? So it's trying to survive. So if we take that away or things change, that's why we start to see things during allergy season and stuff like that, because it's starting to survive. Things get drier. We change our air conditioning to heat. So all of a sudden it has to survive and it starts sporing, and then we get those allergies, right? So again, where it can occur, we need to have that damp area. We need to have the moisture. So it can occur, the nice areas it likes if you have a basement, that high moisture area, damp places underneath kitchen sinks, anywhere that's dark and damp. It likes to like, crawl spaces. We never find it in crawl spaces though, right?
North Carolina.
Yeah. So with some mold types, I'm just going to cover the bare basic mold types. And I've got some information here. What I'll do for everyone that's on Zoom, I'm going to leave a lot of this stuff here for you so you can kind of revisit this stuff if you want to. And of course, I'll be available for any questions. But I want to talk about the mold types that we see the most common. So Aspergillus and Penicillium. So that is the most common indoor-outdoor molds in the world. You're going to see that everywhere. It's very unlikely that someone's going to have a reaction to that unless the counts are extremely high. And how do we know the counts are extremely high? We're going to have to test for it, right? And I'll dive into that here in a little bit. But with Aspergillus and Penicillium, if you have a mold test done, you're going to see that every single mold test. Okay. So whether the counts are super high, and I do have, and I'm going to show this, I apologize. I had these handouts here. Did you get something? Okay, perfect. And I'm just going to show you guys on Zoom if you can see me. I have a paper here, and what this is an interpretation guide. Now I'm going to dive into that a little bit more as we go through this. But you can, if you want to look at this, for those of you that are on Zoom, go to our website right now, homeinspectioncarolina.com, and click on the Realtor tab at the upper right-hand corner. And then you can scroll down, you'll see this. It's down towards the bottom on the right-hand side, but is the mold interpretation guide. And what that'll tell us, and I'm gonna kind of get into that a little bit more and allow people to kind of try and find that are on Zoom. This is going to tell us what by the environmental analysis associates, what they consider is common for indoor mold. And the reason I like to provide this to everybody, my clients and everyone, is because I can't tell anybody what is a good or bad level of mold. We all react differently to it. So for me to say, oh, that's a fine, that's not a high level, shouldn't have any problems. It may not be a problem for me, but you walk in the door, you're like, man, my nose is scratchy, my throat is getting dry. What is going on here? I'm looking at it, I'm like, what's the problem? So it's so hard because we all react differently to it. There's only one person that can tell you how mold's going to affect you. Does anybody know who that is?
Yourself?
Well, yeah, okay. All right, two people. Yourself, right? But if I said that there were levels of, we'll say 15,000 cubic meters of Aspergillus per cubic meter. That is according to this environmental analysis. Let's see, in a clean air, and I'll go through how to read this real quick. Aspergillus, that's still considered common. Above 13,000 would be considered that we need to take a look at this. It's elevated a little bit. So say that it is elevated. How do I know that will affect you? You got it. There it is right there. You got it. The only person who can tell you that is a doctor, right? So how that affects us, what I'm going to go through is these most common mold types. I'm not going to go through all the mold types, but the most common mold types, I'm going to kind of tell you where they kind of range, because I've got three that I'm going to talk about. And I want to talk about the lowest, which is Aspergillus penicillium. I'm going to go to one that can cause a little bit more adverse health effects that people are a little bit more sensitive to. And then we'll talk about another one here. So how many of you guys have seen that picture right there? Where inspectors gone in and said, you have organic growth, microbial growth, fungus growth, however they want to describe that. That is most commonly Aspergillus penicillium. That you're going to find, that picture you're going to find on probably every single house in the 90s. Okay, that is typical, that is common. I would not be alarmed if I saw that. That just is normal for that age of the home. What I want to know, my question would not necessarily be, you can get a mold test, of course, if your client is sensitive and they're really concerned about that. Of course, discuss that with them. Just say there has been some fungal growth that's been noted right there. You don't have to, I'm not telling you, I want you to identify what it is, because I can't tell you exactly what that is. All I can say is that's most commonly Aspergillus penicillium whenever I test it, okay? There may be other molds that are in there, so we don't ever want to get locked into that, okay? But we can say fungal growth has been seen, we can clearly see that. Do you want to have a test for it? Or the next question is that we want to ask before you tell your clients this, the next question you want to ask the inspector is, what are the moisture levels in there? Does anybody know what the moisture level is where all the bad stuff happens?
17, above that.
Anybody else?
20.
Who said that?
Me, Yvonne.
Who was it? I'm sorry.
Yvonne.
Yvonne, you said what, 20?
Is over 20.
Over 20, you got it. All right. When she comes over, is there a place we can give that to her?
Yes.
So yes, 20% is where all the bad stuff happens. Okay. That's where we get conducive environment for mold growth. We have conducive environment for termites, anything that's at 20%. Now, the question we want to know is, what time of year is it? Are we in the middle of July and it's 21%? Then we need a follow-up question. Is there any indication this is an ongoing problem, or do you think this is seasonal? Because if we're getting elevated levels during the season, that's pretty much what you're going to see in a crawl space. That's going to be seasonal changes. Now, if we're above 20% and it's January, there's a problem. And we're going to see a lot more. And as we go through some of these pictures, you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. So another one, which again, if we put them on a scale, we would say Aspergillus and penicillium is most common. This is another common one, but this also shows up when there's more issues that may arise, which is cladosporium. And cladosporium, before I jump, I wanted to let you know, Aspergillus and penicillium, the growth rate on that is about 4 to 7 days. So that happens pretty rapidly. So if we have a problem or an issue, and most of these, all these molds will happen within about 7 days. Cladosporium, you can start seeing results in 7 days where it starts growing. So if someone were to call you, say 3 months from now and say, I have a mold problem, why didn't you tell me about this? It could have just grown 2 weeks ago, depending on what the problem is. Well, did you have a leak? Yeah, we just started having a leak in the roof, 3 weeks ago. Well, that can happen in 3 weeks for sure, 100%. So cladosporium is going to be found more on fruits. It's going to be outdoors as much as it is indoors. And it can be carried in a lot through animals, and especially you see a lot of this indoors, more so in the fall. When we do mold tests and air quality tests in the fall, the levels of mold are a lot higher in the fall. Does everybody know why? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you guys are so smart. I'm telling you, you guys are on top of it. Yeah, so mold is designed to break down things. I mean, without mold, we would have piles and piles of leaves all the way, 30, 40, 50 stories high, because it does eat it and it breaks down that. So when all of those dead leaves start to fall, you're going to have the increase of mold. And then what happens? Anybody has animals or children,
Yeah.
they're tracking through it, right? Playing in the leaves. And then what happens? It gets on their clothes, and where do they bring it? Right into the house. And then they jump right on the couch. Hey, mom, dad, what you doing? Or the dogs, or
Or the bed.
yeah, or the bed. And so then when I'm testing it, those levels are going to be elevated. So that's just a good note to know. Well, we're in the fall and we're testing it, and the levels are a little bit elevated. Now, again, the levels are going to be elevated outdoors. So we should always be higher outdoors than indoors. Okay. So when we're doing a test, we have to do a comparative analysis of the outdoors and versus the indoors. So at a minimum, when you're having a test done, and I'll dive into this a little bit more, if we're doing air quality, we have to do 2 air quality tests, which they're going to have to do 2 of these tests here. So at a minimum, we're going to dive into that a little bit more as we jump in. I'll explain that. So what cladosporium typically looks like, has anybody seen a crawl space like that where there's white dots and there's some discoloration and there's some changes? That usually has some cladosporium in it, and you can see how we're starting to get worse, right? So the mold is starting to get progressively worse. That indicates that we definitely have a problem. We've got some high moisture levels. There's some moisture issues that are going on in there. And I would be willing to bet that we have above 20% moisture levels, especially even in this time of the year, March. If I were to go in that crawl space, I'd be pretty darn close to it, if not above 20%. Okay. Just to let you guys know, if anybody tells you that they are at 40 or 50% moisture, then you need to tell them to get their equipment checked. There are people out there that will tell you that. Because think about it, if we have moisture, I'm telling you the moisture content within wood. Now, does anybody know what the normal moisture content within wood in a crawl space should be?
6 to 10% or 6 to.
No, a little bit higher than that.
14.
Ooh, you're right there. You're the top end of it.
Oh, is that where we were getting on 16 and 17%? I think so, yeah.
Yes, that's just a little bit elevated, but it's still fine. You're perfect. Now that's good. The 16, 17%. Your perfect levels, if I went to a crawl space now between 11 and 13, that's perfect. That's where I want to be. You need to have moisture within the wood, because if I take out moisture and I dry that out, what happens to the wood? It shrinks, right? And it starts getting brittle and it starts getting weak, and it starts, you ever dry a piece of wood that's completely dry.
Yeah.
You know, you can just break it, snap it,
Yep.
right? So we need to have moisture in wood, just like with hardwoods in a home. If I go test it, I should be at 7, 8% in hardwoods in a home. Because if I take out that moisture, it's going to shrink. And that's why we see the shrinking in the winter and the expansion in the summer, because the humidity and the moisture in the summer on a hardwood floor, it expands and then it shrinks in the winter because some of the moisture is leaving it. But we should always be around that 7, 8% within a home on hardwood floors. Now, 11 to 13 is going to be that perfect level. Now, here's the bad one that everybody is scared of, right? Stachybotrys. That is what everybody calls black mold. That's the black mold, right? So if you say, oh, I see black mold in the house, I can tell you right now, don't test it. We don't need to test it. We need to get remediation. We need to get it removed. And what we see a lot of times when we get to black mold, and you'll notice, like I said, and the growth rate on that again is 7 days. So it can grow pretty quick, but this is what you're going to see when you see black mold. Right. So that's where it gets really bad. And if I were to walk into a home and I see black on a wall, all right, not to show my age or anything, but anybody here remember the 80s, right? And the cool hairstyle for guys was the mullet, right? What does the mullet mean?
Church,
What was
church in
it?
the front, party in the back, something like that.
Close, right?
Yeah.
Business to the front, party to
Yeah.
the back. So when I look at a wall and I see dots or specks of mold on the wall, I think of it as a mullet. It's business in the front and they're having a party in the back
Oh, no.
on that backside, right? So if I open up that wall, it's going to be pretty bad inside because it's come through that sheetrock and we've had water problems and water issues, right? So when we see that or we see this, there's no need to get a mold test. If you see that Aspergillus penicillium, that's up to you. And I would probably advise your clients to get a mold test and get it from a third party before you jump into the mold remediation company. The only reason I'm even suggesting this or recommend this to you is because the mold remediation company is going to come out. Let me back up and show you that picture again. They're going to come out and they're going to zoom in on that and they're going to make it look really bad. What is their job? Their job is to sell, right? And remediate this crawl space. And to remediate that crawl space from that is probably going to be about $14,000, $15,000.
Wow. Would that include encapsulation or just to get rid of the?
Just to get rid of that. Usually they'll pull out the insulation, they'll scrub down the floor joists, and then they put new insulation back in. And they're going to charge you about $14,000, $15,000 to do that. So my question again would be, what are the moisture levels? Do we have an indication that it's, you know, an issue or seasonal? Just to get a little bit of background information. And then if your clients are concerned about it, let's have a test done. And we can see exactly what kind of mold that is. And if it's mostly Aspergillus penicillium, my recommendation probably be continue to monitor that unless they are sensitive to that. Because that is the most common indoor molds you'll find. Now, I'm not recommending you advise your clients to do anything. We want to make them make the decision and give them the educated information so they can make that decision, right? So let's talk about how mold affects us. So mold affects us with what? Breathing. A lot of the stuff, some of you may be aware of, some of you may not be. Muscle pain, If you're in a house and you're constantly have muscle pain, it can affect muscle pain. Depression, create depression and sadness. If you're stuck in a home that has a lot of mold, digestive disorders. Stuffy runny nose, as we all know, eye irritation, sore throat, dry cough, sneezing, skin problems. Anybody have itchy skin constantly, or they're breaking out in their skin, hives, stuff like that. It can cause those problems and issues. And brain fog. You just can't think. And you can't process things like you normally would. And if you ever go on vacation, all of a sudden things seem clearer and you're trying to process things, that may be an indication I may have some mold in my house. So it affects us all differently. And again, we may walk into a house and I may start getting some itchiness, and that may be it. And you may be going runny nose and you start coughing. It may affect us all differently. Then again, you may walk in the house and it doesn't bother you at all. So the only way, again, we can test for it is through a doctor, right? And they're going to do that through a skin prick, where they're going to test for you. So I want to show you a couple of pictures here and where mold can be hiding. These are actual pictures of actual things that I have come across, and see where mold is actually sneaking about. So I want to kind of give you an idea of what this is. This is actually a property that I actually purchased, and I purchased it to renovate and resell. And what you're seeing here with that pink and that crown molding, that's actually a fireplace. And they covered up the chimney, and they covered up all this nice brick. It had a real big brick chimney that went up there. And so we took all that, and I was like, oh, well, you know, once I discovered that there was a fireplace behind there, it was brick, I'm like, oh, I want to expose all that brick. Well, we can see the ceiling, we see everything looks okay. And when I started tearing that down, some of the popcorn ceiling came down, and look what I found. Yeah, it's hiding, right? That wasn't even, there was no way you would have known that, really. Let me go back to that picture.
Looks a little damp, but yeah.
Could be, but the house is a 100-year-old house. It's a 100-year-old house. Let me preface about that.
Oh, wow.
So if you walk in a 100-year-old house and you look at that, you're probably going to go, that's a 100-year-old house,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you take off the popcorn ceiling, and there we go.
Oh.
The chimney flashing had been leaking for years
Oh, wow.
around that. Let me show you another one. So this is a one that I actually went in and I inspected, and how I found this was through infrared. And the next picture I'm going to show you, you're gonna be like, well, it was completely obvious. But before I show you the picture, this is what it looked like underneath. You can kind of see, can you see in the middle, you see the little bit of bubbling right there?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. Oh, no, it's not working on that TV. Does it work? No, it doesn't work on those TV. Yeah, you guys can see it, right?
Yeah, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Right in the middle.
And I looked at that originally, I thought it was just the tape.
Mhm.
And I was like, you know, that's a tape thing. So I got my infrared camera out, and all of a sudden I saw some issues around there, and it was real faint. I'm like, there's something. So I went up in the attic and I looked around, and it's all insulation's undisturbed, and it's really nice. But there's a pipe that goes down in the ground right there, and it's a vent pipe for plumbing. Okay, and it exhausts out, and that's, you know, when you flush toilets or run the sinks, the water has to have air to come behind it. So that's where that pipe was. So I start moving the insulation because it's directly around there, and this is what I saw. And you can see it didn't come through the sheetrock, but you see the sheetrock is completely tore up. But it went down into the wall, and what it was, this house was built in 1983, and directly above it, that pipe was never sealed.
Oh, wow.
That has been leaking since 1983 for 40 years. Found that 2 months ago, and it's been draining directly down and into the wall for 40 years. Yeah. Well, so it was a seasonal thing, right? So the when it's cold out, the warmer air was coming up from the inside the house, so the condensation was building up, and it was just dripping down in the winter months. So you probably had 3 or 4 months, maybe 3 months, where it was doing that every year for 40 years. So it was allowing time to dry throughout that process. So that's probably why it doesn't look as bad. But if it was leaking every single day, yeah, it would be pretty bad.
Anybody else going into their attic when they get home?
That's what I feel like. I know one.
So what are some of the easiest ways to improve air quality in your house? What is the easiest way?
What'd she say?
Air filters. Okay.
Bingo, look at that. Look at that. There you go. Air filter, look at that. I want to show you this air filter here. I went, this is actually an Airbnb that I rented in January. And so you could hear it whistling and play. Let's see. And so I opened up the thing and it was completely caked. And I don't even know if this video does it justice, but it was so thick. It was pulling in and it was completely caked. And my wife had runny nose the entire time we were there. And I'm like, what is going on? So we opened up the air filters and we called the owner and they brought all the new air filters in. But just from that, as soon as I changed that, about a day later, she was fine. We're there about a week.
Look at all the junk on there.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually in the basement too. Yeah, if it starts whistling.
Mhm.
Not only that, that is one of the biggest problems that can cause your air conditioner to go bad. And I can't tell you how many times. So not changing your air filter is so important. A lot of people don't think that that's a big deal. A lot of people don't change it once a year, right? It affects the air quality of your home because it's going to pull that in and it's going to blow it all throughout the house. Not only that, what do you think the air conditioner has to do now?
Working harder.
Exactly. Right. So you're pulling in air and also you blocked it. You just blocked it. So now it has to really work hard to pull that, which is going to reduce the life expectancy within that home. So I have a question for you guys. Do you think new construction can have mold?
It could, yeah. I've seen them stand, rain pouring down, and nothing to dry it out before they come right back in and add more stuff to it.
Cover it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you recommend a pre-drywall? Do you guys recommend pre-drywalls
Yeah.
for that? Is that one of the things that you guys kind of look for or would ask the inspector if they see? Have you thought about that? Did you see any mold on this or anything like that? I had some pictures and I couldn't find them of a new construction, but I did have this and I'll show you this video here. This is interesting. Let's see if I can get it to play here. Let's jump over. Okay, so what you're seeing here, see at the top, this is the top of the roof. See that water damage?
Oh,
And that's got mold already starting to happen on that. And also, so I went down a little bit here. You'll see some more where the radiant barrier is starting to pull apart. And we've got black, you see all that black 2x4? Now this one here, do you see the veins on that?
oh, yes.
That's wood destroying fungus. Already starting to happen. This is from one house. Now what I want you to look at is the rafters.
Ooh,
See how that's starting to brown?
freaking-
Look at that. Look at it's getting worse. This is one house.
How long did it stay?
This is 3 days.
Wow. Is it common?
This is common.
Mm.
Now wait for it.
Ooh. What? Whoa. So, hey, that yellow thing, was that the tag from the county saying, hey,
See, it's okay.
you have to- I thought it was like, you gotta fix this.
Nope. So what that was, you notice most of them were trusses. I did see, I had another one, had a whole bunch of 2x4s, but that was the trusses. What they do is they take them and they drop them right in the mud
Mhm.
and they let them sit there until they get to that house. And sometimes they'll drop as you guys drive through new neighborhoods, you'll see them drop 3 or 4 different houses and they just leave them there. So I'm not gonna quote code or anything, but they're required to keep it 2 inches above the grade. And if it's gonna sit out more than 2 weeks, they're required to cover it. But the problem is they're just sticking it right in the mud.
Yeah.
And then it rains. And then on top of that, they could leave it open, and they don't put the roof on it. I mean, how many times have we seen it where it is just wide open and they didn't have it covered or anything like that? And with that, that was one house. And they're just gonna throw the sheetrock and insulation in there and they're gonna cover all that up. Do you think anybody moves in that house?
One should be on it, like the superintendent or the GC on the job site. like,
Sure.
things like that.
They're not, so they're not gonna remove that, and I'll tell you why.
Money.
Well, that's the number one reason. But everything that I showed you was a truss configuration. So in order to remove that, they'd have to cut those out and they'd have to get an engineer out there to rebuild those truss because they're all engineered trusses. So that's gonna be a lot of money. And there was a lot of trusses that were in that house that need to be removed and replaced. One, they should have never done it. What they should have done is they should have reordered some more trusses. That would have been the right thing to do. But there was probably 15 of them in there that were really bad.
So what happened? Yeah. What's the rest of the story?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm that actually is one I just stopped in. I wasn't doing an inspection.
Okay.
So I have no idea what happened with that. I just saw it. And I had been watching this neighborhood and I saw where they just left them there. I'm like, I want to see if they just throw them in the house. And they did.
Would
They
a
did.
county inspector have said
No,
that's a problem?
it's not a code violation.
That should be,
I
that should be
agree.
something.
The integrity of the wood, I mean, right, especially like you said, maybe, I know this topic is mold, but for termites, if there's that much growth or moisture in the wood, I mean, you would think structurally it wouldn't have the integrity of a good piece of wood. Is that right? I mean, does mold destroy the wood?
Yes, it does.
That's
Yeah,
not-
it absolutely does. But they're not looking for that. They're looking whether they nailed it properly. And they have their wires ran. Yeah. Yeah, and it's secure to the outside wall and it's structurally supported. That's what the code enforcer is going to be looking for. They're not looking for hazardous materials.
People buying it have probably no idea, because they probably don't even.
Yeah.
And it is sometimes,
It's
I've
scary.
noticed, it is hard to convince a client to do approved drywall.
Yes.
Because they'll tell me, well, no, the builder has inspectors, I trust them. Well, like, these are all the different things that you can find that you know.
So here's one of the things that we've been challenged with since we're on the topic. And I know this is a little bit off of mold, but with new construction, we have to sign a release now, which releases the builder. But here's the problem with that is it allows, by us signing this, they say that we agree to discuss all of our findings with them, which goes against what our standards of practice is. We're not allowed to do that. So we have to ask the client to provide a letter or an email saying it's okay to describe that. But the other issue is now we're faced with, we're not allowed to have the client attend the inspection. Because when we sign the agreement, we are agreeing to hold the builder 100% harmless to any problems or issues that may arise that are caused by the client or ourselves on site. So if we cause damage or if someone gets hurt, it's our fault. We have to pay. But the problem is in the very first, going to what you said, and this is what triggered me on this, going on this path, but the very first paragraph of that says, though you, let me see if I can remember, I might not be able to say this verbatim, but it says something along the lines of, though you are able to have a third-party home inspection, it is not advised since this is a new construction home and it's not needed. And then it lists all of the demands that we have to provide for them. Yeah, so just kind of prepare you guys for that. That's coming down the road, and it's going to be from everybody's going to start feeling the pressures of this. So that maybe if you have a new construction home, just prepare your clients. Hey, you may not be able to attend this. Now, what we're saying is we'll talk to you guys afterwards for sure and go over everything, and then you can walk in the house because at that point in time we're done, and now it's back on the builder for any liability or any issues for that. Not that I think that there's going to be any problems, but the problem comes is when they bring their kids, their family, and they're running through the house, and we're trying to, focus on what we're trying to do to do a good job for them. That's where the problem comes in. And it's unfortunate that it's coming to this, but the whole point is to prevent us from doing home inspections. To
So
protect
agents
clients.
can't be there either?
It doesn't say anything about the agent.
Okay.
Yeah, we've said, yeah, agents can come because it doesn't say anything. It's only between the client. So far, they'll find that loophole and they'll figure that out and they'll put the agent in there eventually. But it's progressively over the years. I mean, we've had challenges like this for probably the past 10, 15 years, but progressively that agreement's gotten worse and deeper and deeper and deeper and taking more away. The reality is they don't want us there, is what it is. But sorry, I didn't mean to go down that track. Oh, looks like I hit play again. Let's stop that. Sorry. All right, so let's show, I'll show you how we test for this. So for those of you, let me, I'm gonna switch this, stop sharing my screen here. That way you guys can see me here on camera. So how we test for it is we have, there's 2 tests that we do now. There are 3 tests out there. And the third one that we don't do is a tape test. Okay. So we do a swab. And what we do, we do a limited mold sampling. And this is pretty standard across the board with any inspector or anyone that's certified in mold that tests for mold, is they're going to do 3 samples. We can do a combination of the 3 samples. It really, I leave that up to the client because the client is asking us to do this for a reason. Whether one is just to know what the house is and what the air quality is in the house. If that's the case, then we're just going to do air quality tests. Or 2, they have problems and issues, and usually those problems issues reside from a previous problem and issue. Our house was basement, it was super moldy all the time. I want to make sure this isn't moldy down there, or we had mold in our bathroom constantly, and so on and so forth. And so we'll go to wherever the client wants us to do. Now, if they want us to check the bathroom or they want us to check the crawl space, we're going to do a swab. We're going to go in there, we're going to swab the area or any areas of concern that we see, especially if we see, like I showed you with the Aspergillus penicillium, we're going to go ahead and swab that. If I want a crawl space, I'm going to swab that, get it on a swab here. And basically, I'm just going to go collect the information and get it nice and brown like that. And then I'm going to stick it back in the tube and then seal it up, and I'm going to send that off to the lab. Now, when I do my air quality, I'm going to use this machine here. And I'm going to take my air samples. Now, again, we do 3 samples, so it could be 3 air samples, or 2 air samples in 1 swab, or 3 swabs. Now, why do we do those combinations? Like I said, we have to have a comparative analysis for air samples. So we have to see what's going on outside, see what's going on inside, and compare the 2. Like I was saying, in the fall, it's going to be elevated. You're going to have elevated levels. We're going to drag all that information in. It's going to elevate the levels in the house, but we still want to have levels higher outside than inside. If it's higher inside than outside, that may indicate we have a problem, depending on what that is. Now, when those levels, we send these off to the lab, and we're going to hook it up to this machine. You basically just set up the machine and let it run for 10 minutes. It pulls in the air and it collects it on a little tape inside this. And then we seal that back up. And we're going to send it to the lab. The lab's going to pull this apart, and they're going to get all the samples off of that aerosol. Same thing with that swab. Now, when you get the report back, and I'm going to, for those of you that are here, I'll give you a report. And for those of you on Zoom, I will leave these here if you want to review them. And I want to break down how to read the report, because a lot of people get confused on how to actually read the report. And it's pretty simple once I break it down. So obviously the first page in the report is just going to be the information about the property. The second page for the lab that we use, and it's pretty common across the board to see what we're going to see. So the lab that we use is going to be the air samples. So the first one we're going to see is going to be the air sample, and it's going to identify anything that was found, any spore counts that were found. And it's going to identify the spore counts. What we're looking for is per cubic meter, the CT, what is that? CTS M to the 3rd power per cubic meter. That's really what I'm looking at, and see how high those levels are, because that tells me what it's sporing at and what's the air quality is within that home. So let's, for example, and if those of you that are online were able to go to that sheet that I had talked about, the environmental analysis associates sheet. So for example, Let's go to, we'll use aspergillus and penicillium. We're going to use the second column here for those that are here because we have, it's listed in the top. It says outdoors, front porch, and we have upper level bedroom. And that's where we had tested that. And it was probably because they may have a daughter that has asthma and they wanted to make sure that that level in that bedroom was pretty low. So we're testing that again, the comparative analysis. That's why you see two different levels here. So we had a count of aspergillus penicillium at 600. So if I go to my environmental analysis interpretation guide that you can pull off our website, and I go down, can anybody tell me what that is? Does anybody know how to read that? So if I go to typical indoor mold concentrations at the bottom, yep, you're on the right spot. And then I go to clean HVAC air supply. So I'm going to go underneath that. And at my count, we're at, what did I say, 640? So I'm going to look between 600 and 13,000. And then, yep. So then I'm going to scroll over to aspergillus and penicillium, which is the AS/PE on the environmental chart. Do you see that? Yep. So then I'm going to scroll to that and it's got a C there. Do you see that? So that tells me, according to them, if your clients were to ask, well, is this a high level? According to them, that's considered common. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I had levels, again, at 12,000, and I would look at it, well, that's still considered common. Now, I'm not saying it's common. You're not saying it's common. They're saying it's common. Okay, so we have a source that we can go back to say, well, they say this is common for indoor mold. Now, we're just saying it's common per what they're saying. How that affects you, I have no idea. Right. But we can say this is common or typical according to the environmental analysis associates and help them make a better decision. Now, if you move in and there's a problem and you start feeling itchy, scratchy, what have you, then you may want to go get tested for that, for aspergillus penicillium, and see if you are sensitive to that. Or if they can go get tested, depending on what the due diligence is, if they have time to do that, if they are really concerned about it, they can go get tested before that. I think the turnaround time is about 7 days on testing on that. And also trying to get the doctor's appointment too, right?
Yeah.
So as you can see on this mold report, and because it comes in a lot of pages, so people get really overwhelmed. And I'm going to explain why you have a lot of pages on it. So when we look at this mold report, we can see there are some that have numbers and then the rest of them have non-detected. Any one of these that have numbers, the following pages, I'm going to skip to page 6 here. Actually, I'm sorry, 7. And I'll go over those pages in a second that we just skipped. But from 7 to 12 on this report is going to identify the molds that were found and basically give you the information about how it can affect you. Any reactions, where it's found, whether it's common, what causes this mold to grow in your home, what the mold growth rate is. It gives you all that information about that mold. So when your clients get this report and it says, they say, I don't know how to read this. That's my whole goal today, is kind of explain this to you so you can kind of guide them. Of course, we're here and we'd be happy to answer any questions, but you can guide them through this and say, hey, this is what they found on that one page on the front. And then on the back page explains what those molds are. So every page here after will explain every mold that was found. Now, some reports may be 30 pages because you may have all these molds found. Then again, some reports may be 8 pages. So it really depends, and the length of the report is going to depend on how many molds were found, because they're going to supply you with the information about the molds following that. Okay. And everyone on here will have the health effects, like I said, the growth and the distribution, and also at the bottom, it'll tell you where it was found. Okay. And then, so if we flip back to page 2, this just gives a graph for all the graphy people that like graphs. That's really not anything. Then we're going to have the spore trap analysis explanation. So this will tell you a little bit more about, which is on what page am I on? 4? how it was collected, how it's registered, how it's read, how it's identified. It's really, I mean, not that big of a deal. But the next one you're really going to look at, if they did a swab, you may or may not have this. If they didn't do a swab, you're not going to get this because there may be 3 air samples that they did. But if they do a swab, they're going to give you this. The nice thing I like about this, well, those of you that are on here, it's color coded. Okay, so if you look at the colors on the left-hand column, and you look at the color on the bottom,
Yeah.
it'll explain exactly where it's most commonly found. That's pretty, I mean, it's just somebody in the background. I think that helps out a lot because you can really see, well, this is common indoor, this is common outdoor, so on and so forth. So we had cladosporium. We had some medium traces. It looks like the bathroom vent. Again, they probably saw issues and wanted to have that tested. And then that's common indoor or cladosporium. And it was medium traces. And then we could go back, if we're really concerned, we can go back to this and say, well, medium traces cladosporium between 101 and 1000. So I'm going to go back to my sheet and go, well, all right, cladosporium is here. So it's between, what did I say, 1 and 1000? That is considered what? Cladosporium common. For that one.
This is considered common, is that mediating or is that something?
It's commonly found at those levels within a house. That's
Just not going to be able to. Like that really in that range.
you can, yeah, absolutely. You have to identify the source, one. And then you have to fix that source, and then you have to remediate if that was a problem or issue. So it's really, the challenge is not removing it, the challenge is identifying the source. Because a lot of times it could be, for example, that bath vent could have a seal around it that broke, and it's allowing condensation between the air and the attic rather, and the area. And so there's a little bit of growth that may be happening there. So we need to seal that up. That would be the remediation for that, basically to seal that up. And we probably start to see for the first probably 7 days, you'd have offsporing because again, it's going to try and survive. And if it can't find that damp area that it likes, it's going to end up dying on. But that's also a sign too, that if you did find it and all of a sudden you get really sick. So if you found it in your own home personally, say if you found it and all of a sudden you fixed it and then you start feeling worse, that may be a sign that you did fix it. Because a lot of times people say, you didn't fix it, I'm feeling worse. Well, you did fix it because now it's offsporing and it's trying to survive, and that's why you're getting worse. So if 7 days go by and you start feeling better, it's probably fixed. So that initial reaction would be just the offsporing on that. So let me bring my screen back up here. All right. And you guys have been awesome, and I'm almost done. So we talked about the report. Kind of jump ahead there. I probably should run over this while you guys are on the screen there. I'm sorry. I forgot about that, but that's basically, these are the pages that I was just discussing. Let me bring that back up for everybody. I'll do a quick review. So on this page here, this is everything that we were just discussing. So this is where all your numbers are going to be found. And on this particular one, and it's the same exact one that I handed out. So we were looking at the 640, which was here. And that's on that. If you have that environmental analysis sheet, if you went to download that, you can look at that and kind of follow along with that. The second sheet, which is the analysis explanation. And then here was the swab that we had discussed, where we had the medium traces of cladosporium, and it was between 101 and 1000. And that would be the color codes here on the left, and then the color code on the bottom. And that would be considered common indoor. But again, if you cross-reference that to the environmental analysis associates, it would say it's common within that range. I do apologize. I forgot I had that on there. Or I forgot to jump to it. And then this is just the definition or explanation on the swab. This is where it would explain all the information that's found within the report. It identifies again the health effects, how fast it grows, and gives you some information of where it comes from in common growth. This is again where you can find this information, the resources that you can get. And some of the resources that we have on there, of course, I brought them today, is the mold prevention tips, which you guys have there to prevent that from happening. And then the mold interpretation guide, which I had discussed there. If you go to our website, you can pull that information up. And then lastly, does anybody have any questions? No questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you know how sometimes the bathrooms, even though they have the exhaust fans, you'll see a little bit of like the black mold that'll be around the trimming on the ceiling from the high moisture levels in the bathroom.
Mhm.
When you see that, is that something that you recommend we tell them to get tested, or what's a way to get that treated?
So that's a good question. So on the exhaust fan, and we see that a lot on the registers too, right? So the
Yeah.
exhaust fan, depending on what it is, it could be exactly what we were just discussing. It could be a seal where you have the moisture, the air leaking into the attic. So you have the moisture from the condensation from the inside, just like a Coke can, right? We have the hot air in the summer where it's 130 degrees in the attic, and you've got it cool in temperature at 70 degrees inside, and you're going to have some moisture differentials in there, which is going to cause some growth around that. The other thing could be if it's actually on the fan itself, where mold likes to grow. Mold very rarely grows on plastics. It's going to grow on, now it will grow on plastic if it has dust on it. So it's going to grow on dust because it grows on organic growth. Anything that's organic, it's going to grow on. So if it has dust on that fan, it's going to grow on the fan.
Okay.
So cleaning the fan, making sure you're not losing air between the attic and the ceiling will probably resolve that issue. Now we see that on the ductwork on the registers. I mean, how many houses you gone into, you look at the registers all dirty, and you can see it where it's coming off the edges along the side between the ceiling and the actual vent. And that's the same, that's the air filter. You're pulling in dirty, dusty air, and you're blowing out dirty, dusty air. And also the same thing, if it's not sealed or tight against that ceiling, you may have some condensation build up there as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions? Any questions on your own personal home? That's what I get a lot.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Lynette.
Lynette.
I have a family that moved into a new build. It was actually already covered and everything. Drywalls were already up and everything when they first went to see it. And their kids have been sick ever since they moved in that house. So what would you recommend as far as having their air quality tested for anything? Or, I mean, we can't go in and rip out walls and see what's behind it, but
No, you can't. One of the things, just going through new construction, I mean, I have seen it in the 2x4s. I have seen it in the framing in the house, but not as bad as I've seen it in the attic on the rafters, because again, they just drop right in the mud and they sit there for weeks. The first thing, of course, I would do is do a air quality test and see what the quality of the air is in there. And if there's elevated levels, then the next thing would probably be an investigation to kind of see what's going on. If it is, and it can be identified that it is in the attic, that's easily clean. They can remove the insulation and clean that off. Of course, that's going to be pretty expensive because you got to remove all that stuff. Now, like to your point, can't really, I mean, it's where do you stop? Because you can start tearing open walls. Probably if it's an interior wall, an infrared camera is not going to really tell you much. Even if it's next to your wall that's not leaking or anything, it's not going to tell you much. Most likely it probably was there when it was built, similar to the video that I showed. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Back to her question, what can you do?
I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, the only thing, because you can't go back on the builder, because we just talked about the growth rate. So that's what they're going to play, right? Well, the house has been there for 6 months, a year. That could have started, whenever. I'm sure in their fine print, it's going to say we're not responsible for mold or organic growth.
Yeah.
They say that with radon. Now, of course, new construction, they're putting in the piping system, but they're not putting in the actual ventilation system, the fan itself, but they are starting to put the pipe in there. But again, they're gonna have that in the fine print. The only real thing to do would be to try and identify it the best you can. And if you do see it on the rafters, most likely, unfortunately, the likelihood it's in the walls is probably as well.
So who would they contact to have that tested?
You can contact anybody. Of course, we do it. We can do mold testing, Home Inspection Carolina, but anybody that's certified a hygienist is if you look as far as mold goes, with mold testing, a hygienist is like considered a structural engineer. They're the top of the top. So if you want to get that, of course, you're going to pay a lot for a hygienist to come out there. But if you want to do a more deeper inspection, actually start inspecting. But my first step would be to do the mold test, get the air quality, and see what's going on in that house. It may just be that the daughter's overly sensitive to something in her room. She could have food that's underneath the bed that's been sitting there for months. She could be allergic to a pet that they weren't aware about. She could be at the neighbors playing with a pet that she may be allergic to, or there could be another contributing factor. I don't want to be saying that it is the house, but there are also outside factors that could contribute to that. If it is just the daughter that's getting sick, if it's the entire family, that would be likely that it's probably in the house. But first thing I would do is do an air quality test and start your elimination from there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Is the theory of if you see something, I've always heard, diluted bleach solution helps if you see just in an isolated area, like.
Good question. Very good question. Do not use bleach.
That is a myth then.
That is a myth.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because bleach is what, 90% water, right? Or something like that. I forget what the contents of that is, but it's highly concentrated water, right? It has a lot of water in it. So what you're doing with bleach, so mold has a top and it has a root system. Sort of like if you can envision a piece of grass, right? What you're doing is you're taking off the top of the grass. You're not getting rid of the roots, right? So you're wiping that off, but then you're feeding it because you're giving it water. Right, so then it absorbs that water and just grows back. So mildew is a myth. Mildew really doesn't exist. There's no such thing as mildew. I forget, I think it was in the 40s that a corporation came up with the word mildew, which mildew is basically mold, so they could sell products. Mildew remover, this and that. And you notice that if you spray it in the bathroom, it keeps coming back. That's why, because you're just wiping off the surface.
So how do you get it if you see some?
You need
spots in
to
the
get
bathroom?
something that'll dry it out. Usually there's foggers that you can get. If you're going to use any kind of liquid or something to wipe it off with, I would use like vinegar. Vinegar will dry it out. But other than that, usually you need to have some sort of fogger. Of course, you want to wipe it off, get the surface off, and then you want to fog it and clean it. But the biggest thing is getting to that root system and getting the root
Say
system.
fog it, are there types of products out there that are foggers for this kind of-
There are residential foggers where you can go. My wife actually bought one that you can go in and you can fog a house and you spray it. It's all organic and it's natural and it doesn't hurt you. Of course, you don't want to breathe it all in. You want to wear a respirator when you're spraying it, just so you're not breathing everything in. But within 20 minutes, you can go back in the house. And it smells like chlorine. It smells like a pool after you've gone back in the house.
And that's something you get at Lowe's or Home Depot or?
I would have to check. I don't think you can get it at Lowe's or Home Depot. I think you have to order that online. And the cost for that, I think, is roughly like $150 for an actual sprayer. And then it comes with the formula. You have to buy that, and it's about $30 or $40 a bottle for a gallon. And you can spray that. Now, if that's something you want to do just for normal in your home, if you see like a bathroom, kind of say a mildew or mold growing in there, you can wipe it down and spray it with that. But the problem with, of course, the bathroom, it's always high humidity. You're going to have that, and especially in the winter, right? You're going to have that, and in the summer because you got the air conditioner going. But yeah, you're going to be battling that. But keeping it under control and not allowing it to go behind the walls and stuff like that is key.
Been stopping for these hair filters on my way home and again,
And don't buy the best
I
ones.
know it, that's what we had more high end, I didn't mean to take your time, but
No, you're fine. That's what I'm here
high-end,
for.
An HVAC guy said, oh yeah, you need, because we had some family members with allergies and they said, we saw these custom, very high density metal mesh air filters. And we paid a lot of money for that because we believed what he told us, that's probably 20 years ago when we had moved into our house. And then later, I had the air conditioning trouble with it replaced and they said, that's what that HVAC guy said, buy the cheapest air filter for your cold air returns, but just replace them more often so that
Yeah.
the air can go through it. So which is the right way, the more dense or? more
Again, it depends on you
transparent
and
or
as the
whatever
person.
open?
If you're going to change them every 30 days, you could probably get away with a cheaper one. If you're not, then definitely get something a little bit
The
better.
allergen.
Yeah,
3M, I
they
think
actually have the 3M ones, you can get them at Lowe's or Home Depot. They actually have sensors in them that you can get an app on your phone. It'll tell you when it needs to be replaced.
That's cool. That is,
Yeah.
you know, that's going to be going off all the time because they want you to buy new ones.
Oh, of
That's the
course,
tricky
right,
part.
right.
It's like, you know, are they doing it for the well-being of the
Right.
consumer? Or, I mean,
Well, here's my
Fine.
theory on that. Now, I think every one of them says to replace it every 90 days, or excuse me, 30 to 90 days. But there are some out there that are longer. What we talked about earlier is if that air filter gets clogged, the air conditioner has to work harder to pull that. So the thicker it is, the harder it has to kind of pull the air. And then when you start getting dust on top of that, it's going to work harder. So if you do use that, you still have to do it every 30 days more or less.
Sometimes it's pretty, you need just to look and look at it.
Yeah.
If you need to change it.
Like you said,
There's too many apps for everything. I don't want all those
I
apps
know,
on my
I know,
phone.
there's an app for everything. There's an app for that. What was that? That was from the early 2000s, right? But like you said, if it starts whistling, you probably
Yeah.
waited a little too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about, oh, if I could ask another question.
Absolutely.
About duct cleaning.
Mhm.
I've never had that done, but I know some people religiously believe that that is key when they move into a place, maybe back to Lynette's point,
Yeah,
that whether it's new construction because of all the dust and debris that falls into the ductwork, is that something that a house should have done? Is that a good idea?
That
For
is-
prevention.
yeah. So that's up for debate, right?
They might not know what she said though.
Can you guys hear the questions? I'm sorry. Can everybody hear the questions that are being asked? So I'm just having a conversation with myself.
Yes.
Okay, good. So the question about the ductwork and being changed, as far cleaned. So that could be up for debate. Now, one of the telltale signs is if you're running your air conditioning and you constantly notice that every time the air conditioner is on, you have to dust the house. Stuff starts getting, you probably have dirty air ducts. That would be my thing. Now, like you said, you open it up and look in there, and if it looks relatively clean, there's not a lot of dust, you're probably okay. If you have a lot of dust coming around the registers, you probably have dirty air ducts. Now, if the house is built in the 80s and it's never been changed, probably need to get it either cleaned or changed out the ducts, especially from the 80s. They've upped the insulation factor and requirements on ductwork in the past 2 years from an R6 to an R8. So the air conditioner doesn't have to work as hard because it's insulated, and you're going to get better air quality and airflow throughout the house. So if you're looking at a house built in the 80s or 90s, you're going to have a little bit lower quality versus what you're going to have today. Now, if it's a house from that era, then yeah, you probably may want to look at, having someone take a look at that. But the telltale sign is if you get dust all over the place. If you have a lot of dust all the time, you're constantly wiping off the tables, counters coming from your air ducts. Hopefully that answered your question. I always get that, right? Every time I come here and I talk to agents, they're like, oh my gosh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that for my house. Anybody else have any questions? It doesn't have to pertain to mold, anything I can help with? Anybody?
It does go back, if I could ask another question. If
Yeah.
you get something, say from my house, for example, and I get someone to check and sure enough in the crawl space or basement, there's evidence of some sorts of mold. and I get that remediated, that's something that I'll always forever have to disclose. Let's just say I go to sell the house in 10 more years, and this is more of a real estate agent question, I guess, but that is a material fact, even if it's remediated, is that correct?
It's my understanding,
If
you
it
wouldn't
was
have to.
gone, It was gone.
It would fall in the same factors. If you fix something, you wouldn't have to, disclose that.
Because I think there is a question on the disclosures, the real estate property disclosure form though, isn't it? And then you have to, has there ever been?
Yeah, I would
That's
defer
how
that
the
to you guys.
question
That's-
Is worded, so if there has ever been, and then you have room to just. To explain
Mhm.
when, so that is material, is that a material fact? Being in the utmost ethical.
It's on the disclosure. Answer it honestly.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
or however it's worded.
Yes, that's
what,
good
I
advice.
mean, it's like that.
Answer it
Burying
honestly.
the head in the sand. I mean, and obviously, that's what I would want to do, but
Yeah. I would
that is
defer to
a
you guys on
dilemma,
that.
I guess, when people want to do something preventatively,
Yeah,
Well,
especially if
if-
there's no symptoms, everyone's asymptomatic in the house.
If you don't really see it, you're just doing something ahead of time, then you wouldn't have had it, you were just
Yeah.
preemptive strike, like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't have termites, but I don't wanna get them, let me go ahead and treat.
Yes. Or just
Yeah.
a little corner of the house, like termites, and you treat that for $300, like, would that count as, yes, you had termites at some point, you know what I mean? What
yeah.
Is that? 'cause
I'll
it
defer to
sounds
you guys on that one.
onerous to say we have mold, right? Mold is as scary as a termite diagnosis or finding would be.
When you
Yeah.
don't know who cleaned it or if they cleaned it properly.
Correct.
So that's why you want to answer,
Truthfully.
okay, yeah. Here's how it was
And
handled.
then give the
Or
report
whatever.
if they would require the report, I guess. of the-
I think so.
Yeah, I think the scary thing, the whole topic that we talked about today is, you have mold or mold was found.
Yeah,
Immediately, everybody panics, right?
Mhm.
So that's why I tried today. My goal was to provide you with tools and resources to temper them down a little bit and say, okay, well, all right, we identified that, but every house has mold. Every house is going to have Aspergillus penicillin. I'm telling you, every test you get, it's always going to have Aspergillus penicillin. So one, you can tell them that every house has that. Let's see what the levels are. Okay, the levels according to this, environmental analysis, that the levels are considered common within the home. You have a problem or a known problem with this mold. No, well, you may want to get tested and see if this is a problem. If it's not, we're good. If it's well above that, then we need to get a mitigation system. Excuse me, I'm thinking right on. You have to get it remediated. But if you have that black mold, like I said, there's no sense in testing. We see that even the cladosporium that I showed you, once we see that, there's no sense in testing. Just save your money. Let's get it remediated and moved out of the house.
And that whole process is to remove insulation and you all
Yeah.
dry that out or clean that.
Yeah,
and
just
then
on a,
replace
right.
insulation.
Yeah, they'd have to remove all that. They have to clean the floor joist. But the problem that they don't ever fix, and this is what I was going to say, whether it's client or personal home of yours, make sure they fix the source of the problem.
Yeah.
They don't ever do that. For example, if they had that black mold, that picture that I showed you, they'll replace that joist. They'll go down there, they'll cut that out, fix that, but they don't fix the source of the water coming in.
How do you feel about encapsulation?
It's up for debate.
Because to me, I love the idea of it,
Sure,
but like the earth is still, then it's sealed.
it
but
is
then
sealed.
it can't breathe.
That's right. So
So
there's
how
a
do
lot
you-
of stuff that is good about it, and there's a lot of stuff that's bad about it. So
Relating to mold and moisture.
no, to your point, what you said, it's sealed. So what does that do for gases that come up from the ground, such as radon, and it gets in there? How does it get out?
So it might be okay for moisture, but radon would be. elevated.
Open up a can of worms, aren't we?
I know.
Well, the other thing too that we see is the combustion air for if you have a gas furnace in there, they seal it all up. Now they don't have any combustion air coming in, where the combustion air was pulling in from the vents. So we see that a lot where they don't think of that aspect of it. So now you're just blowing carbon monoxide into the crawl space, or it's pulling its own air rather. Yeah, so but if it's done and it's done right, and you don't have any radon issues or radon problems, it can be beneficial. It's just making sure that it's done.
And if anybody wants to know more about radon, Preston will be doing a radon one for us next month.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Got a
So-
radon one coming up.
And y'all should watch this because I just attended or Zoomed a CE that somebody was doing on radon.
Okay,
So very informative. So I'm looking, y'all need to, when Preston does his,
awesome.
which I'll be here for that also, but
Yeah, yeah, awesome. He's gonna do it here or different location?
I have to decide. Yeah, I have to decide. But anyways,
Awesome. Yeah,
yeah, he's gonna do that for us sometime in April. I forget
Awesome.
when, but
very good, very good.
yeah, so that's
Yeah.
definitely something people wanna,
Radon's always fun.
yeah. So I'm glad you asked that encapsulation question because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you have a crawl space, you need to get it encapsulated. And I'm like, I'm not really sure how I feel about that.
Well, here, so
I'm sure that's the other thing, again, money well spent, I don't mind doing, but it's like, I don't know. I
well,
don't mind.
But also, if
it's gonna
If
answer
you have
every
20 years
question,
with
but
no
crawl
issue with your
something-
crawl space, why would you
Exactly.
encapsulate it?
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
So here's the problem is the house was built a certain way in a certain design. Not all designs are good, let's just face that. But for example, if you take 40 or 50 built house, and the worst thing, which I see them do all the time, what is the one thing that they do with air conditioning? They put a gas pack on it, they run all this ductwork in the inside, and now you've changed the condition of the original condition of what that crawl space was. That crawl space used to be all to breathe. That's why we see so many problems in 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s houses, not necessarily because they're old. Yeah, that does have something to do with it. But it's you've changed that condition and for years now, it was supposed to ventilate and now you've stopped that cross ventilation and now the moisture just sits in. But when you're doing something similar to that, you have a house that's built in the 90s and also you encapsulate it past 30 years, it's been built a certain way and it's been breathing fine. Now you've changed that condition. Now, you may have stopped mold, but did you take too much of the moisture out? Now is it going to start shrinking the wood? It's going to start cracking stuff. Now do you have to add a humidifier down there just to increase the levels? So again, it's up for debate. We could sit here and some houses definitely need it for sure. I'm not saying you don't, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But it's one of those old sayings, don't fix what's not broke, right? So, and I know, I mean, their job is to sell, and that's what they're gonna say, oh, you need to have this encapsulated. Well, there's nothing wrong with it.
Mhm.
So it's not fix what's not broke.
Mhm.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Any other questions? Because I won't be here all week.
Yeah.
Hannah.
The word.
Hey, Lauren. Hi, I didn't even know you were on.
Popped in.
Did you have a question, Lauren?
I don't have any questions, but that was
Oh.
really good. I think I even learned some new things.
Very
Awesome.
good. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for having me today. Was there some questions in the chat? I see there's 5. I didn't look on there.
Thank you.
Good morning. Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'm going to leave my card here. And I'm going to leave a card here. It's a thank you card, and it has a promo code on there. And if you guys schedule with us, you'll take $35 off an inspection for you. So feel free to use that. And I'm going to leave a lot of documentation here for you guys as well. And like I said, on our website, if you go to our Realtor tab, you can download the documentation I talked about today. So thank you so much for your time, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chip. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Appreciate it.